Hey everyone, I'm back. It has been a minute. Thought I would hop in on that fun trend. Seems like tier lists are kind of the hot thing. Seems really fun, so I figured it's my turn. And what I'm going to be doing today is going over some deadlift variations and how I feel they stack up. Originally, this was going to be both deadlifts and deadlift accessories, but with how many items came to mind, I figured it would make more sense to separate them out a little bit. That way, it's not a 30-minute long video. And something worth mentioning too is context. When I'm looking at these movements and how I'm layering them in terms of the tiers, is I want to think about how they're improving your 1 to 10 rep max performance in the deadlift. So this is sort of that strongman power building style of mindset, as opposed to these movements for power lifting, which is purely just the 1RM performance. Additionally, I'm not going to be talking about sumo deadlifts at all in this, because frankly, I don't think I'm qualified to speak on them. So with that being said, let's dive in. Our first variation is going to be the axle deadlift with straps. Without straps, the axle deadlift, not a big fan of it because mixed grip, great way to pop a bicep. Double overhand, I mean, if you're looking for grip work, that's great. But for actually improving the deadlift in and of itself, I'm wishy-washy. But that said, just the pure axle deadlift with straps, A tier. And the reason why is people will talk about pulling on a stiff bar versus pulling on a deadlift bar, how much slack you get out of it, how much easier it is to break the floor. The axle eliminates that variable entirely. There's absolutely no give, so it's a very punishing variation. So if you have a weird starting position, you're going to pay for it. Additionally, because the bar is just a little bit thicker, it puts it slightly more out in front of you, so it does increase the demand on your back, glutes, and hamstrings, posterior chain overall. Great variation. Now, next up here, let's talk about block pulls between 1 to 3 inches, so you could call this a lower block pull. I'm going to put these solidly in B tier. These are great for improving the mid-range of your deadlift, which is where a lot of people have trouble. And usually if you have trouble in the mid-range, well, that means your lockout also is going to suffer as a result of that. Additionally, for someone like myself, I've got great leg drive in my deadlift, so deficit deadlifts actually don't affect me that much. The block pull in this case will actually improve my drive off the floor because it gets rid of all of my leg drive. So a very punishing, challenging variation that'll help you whether you're looking to improve mid-range, bottom range, or even the top end, as long as you keep the elevation reasonable. Again, 1 to 3 inches. Which leads into our next variation, which I'm just going to call high elevation block pulls. So this could be wagon wheels, this could be silver dollar, things like that. Honestly, these are D tier for me for general development. And the reason why is what I have found is when you get really high elevation, you'll notice people tend to change their stance quite a bit. They move their feet around, their grip width changes because they're maximizing that specific variation rather than using it to overload and improve their primary deadlift from the floor. Now, if you're training for a strongman competition where it's wagon wheels or highly elevated deads, that's a different application, right? So again, for most of us, very high elevation block pulls, D tier. Now, the deficit deadlift, right to S tier. And of course, 1 to 3 inch deficit. Anything more than that, I find the mobility demand is excessive, so it's questionable how much transference it has because your overload ability is going to be limited. But for most of us, the deficit deadlift is going to improve our entire deadlift. And the reason I say that is it's going to improve your starting deadlift position because you are going to learn how to set your hips a little more correctly to maximize your leg drive. It'll improve the mid-range since you have to fight harder to accelerate more violently off the floor, and it's going to improve your lockout because you have a longer way to fight all the way to the top. Think of this as the close grip bench press for your deadlift. All around, a great variation. Again, keep the deficit reasonable, 1 to 3 inches. Next up will be the rack pull, F tier. Rack pulls, I don't like them. And the reason why is if you are training in a commercial gym, especially if you don't control the eccentric, which a lot of you are guilty of, they tend to screw up the bars and they bend them because it's those pins smashing into the sides of the bar, plus you have those plates oscillating, so it's hard on the equipment. Additionally, because the bar is loaded through the bar itself and not through the plates, what happens is you get a pre-bend in that bar, so it changes the dynamics of the pull versus pulling off of blocks or the floor because you can't get the slack out of the bar, you can't pre-tension yourself nearly as well, and you get a little more elevation as a result of that. Now that being said, if you did do rack pulls with an axle, it's slightly less awful, but now you're kind of getting into too many variations at once, so we'll just stop there. Now, the paused deadlift. I'm going to put this fella in B tier. I like the paused deadlift because it's a highly useful variation for improving both the start of your deadlift or even improving repetitions of your deadlift, depending on wherein you add the pause. If you want to improve the start to mid-range of your deadlift, you're going to pause on the concentric about mid-shin, or you could pause right off the floor and then right below mid-knee with a double pause. This helps you, again, dial in that bar path, keep that thing in close against your shin so it's not getting away from you. Conversely, if you want to get better at repetitions, or if you're just looking for more hypertrophy, time under tension style training, pausing on the eccentric just off the floor will help you learn how to absorb and redirect force. This is great if you are training for a 4 reps event. And a shout out to the floating deadlift, which is essentially just a pause eccentric deadlift, 4 reps where the plates never touch the floor. These are awesome for overloading the posterior chain. All around a great movement. Something I like to do is I actually tend to pause a lot of my deadlift warm-up sets just to help me find my position for the day, see how everything's feeling. Next up will be the snatch grip deadlift. I'm personally going to put this in A tier. And the reason why I like the snatch grip deadlift so much is it really hammers the upper back as well as helping you refine your hip height position. Because unlike the deficit deadlift, the snatch grip does not affect your knee bend as much because your feet aren't elevated. But it does artificially shorten your arms. So for someone like myself, I've got quite the wingspan. This makes me pay for that because now I'm a little more hunched over, and that wide grip again really gets my upper back working overtime to help me lock in and maintain that stronger position. Also, if you do strongman, this is really great variation for helping improve your carrying events as well as loading. All around a really good movement. If you are going to do these, do them with straps. You know, a mixed snatch grip deadlift is a great way to pop a bicep, and let's not do that because that will derail your training very quickly. Snatch grip deficit deadlift. Normally, I would not put in what's called a 2-step variation where you're changing 2 things versus your regular deadlift, but I had to give this one the nod because it is a great variation. We're going to put this in B tier for the same reasons that I like the snatch grip and the deficit deadlift. Really forces you to dial in your hip position, really punishes the upper back. This is a really good one for using at the start of an accumulation phase, deep in the off season, and also it can help you improve your mobility, plus your stance width. A lot of these deficit deadlift and snatch grip deficit or snatch deadlift as well as snatch grip deficit deadlift variations, I find people tend to go narrower over time with these, which I think is a good thing because if you've been watching me for any amount of time, I think most people's deadlift stance is actually too wide. You know, that said, this is more applying to the sub 200 pound crowd. If you're heavier than that, that might not be the case. But regardless, the snatch grip deficit deadlift will really help you learn how to dial in hip height as well as lock in your upper back for maximum tension in such a way that even if your upper back is slightly rounded, you have a rigid midline so you don't collapse. Next up, the accommodating resistance deadlift. So this is versus bands or chains. I'm going to put this one in C tier. I'm pretty lukewarm on this movement overall. Now, a lot of folks do like it for helping improve speed in the deadlift. They're ubiquitous in a traditional conjugate template. But again, if we're talking that 1 to 10 RM performance, I'm not necessarily sold on these. However, if you are peaking for a 1 rep max, like in a powerlifting meet or something, this would be a great way if you wanted to get 2 touches a week on the deadlift without overloading your body, since it only gets really heavy over the top while still cueing that violent acceleration as if it were a heavier weight. So, again, lukewarm, not a bad movement overall, though. Next up will be the Romanian deadlift. So, big thing with the Romanian deadlift, what I tell everyone is this starts from the top. So the first rep is probably just a conventional deadlift unless you're taking it out of the rack. And then you're going to hinge back, loading the glutes and hamstrings, and then come back up. And you only go as low as you can think about pushing your butt back. If your knees start bending, if you start curling your low back, you're missing the plot. These are S tier. I think these are one of the best overall movements for helping improve your deadlift, especially if you are a more novice to intermediate deadlifter. Having this be your primary deadlift even is a great option for improving your hinging mechanics because you're starting from the top rather than starting from the floor. For a lot of folks who are still dialing in their deadlift technique, what I find is if they start from the floor, they're in this kind of weird hunched over half squat, half deadlift position with a rounded low back. By starting with the eccentric, all of the RDL, you're able to get a better stretch on your glutes and hamstrings, so it has a ton of transference. I could also make the argument that if you're purely looking to build muscle in your posterior chain, the RDL is probably going to be a little bit better than the traditional deadlift from the floor. Trap bar deadlifts. I'm going to put these in A tier. Trap bar deads are a unique one because they are kind of right in between the squat and the deadlift, depending on how you set yourself up. They're very easy to get into position, good, simple, all-around movement, great for general development. Also, trap bars don't have a lot of give, so they can help you really learn how to stay tense in the bottom and get that oomph and that leg drive. Something I like to do with them is I'll actually pull the trap bar from a deficit, but I stay on the high handles. And the reason why is by staying on the high handles on a trap bar, it doesn't sway back and forth so much, so you don't get that oscillation. Feels a bit more stable overall. A great all-around variation. If you're really wanting to hammer your posterior chain, try something like a floating trap bar deadlift, where you're just going up and down, constant tension, where those plates don't quite touch the floor. That'll really light up the glutes and hamstrings. Good variation for most of us. Now, the stiff leg deadlift. The stiff leg deadlift and straight leg deadlift are not the same thing. The stiff leg deadlift starts from the floor. Your position is somewhere between straight-legged as well as your standard deadlift. It can be a little hard to master, but it is a very good variation for improving your mid-range on the deadlift as well as back strength. These are B tier. Again, if you are a very strong leg drive deadlifter, these will help you learn to push through that position if you do lose it towards the mid-range, or if you just need to improve your overall low back strength. Then the straight leg deadlift. As the name implies, this is the deadlift that starts from the floor with your legs straight, F tier. I do not like these at all. Most of us do not have the mobility to make this work. What tends to happen is it just codes bad deadlift technique, so it reinforces a bad position. It teaches you how to deadlift incorrectly. Don't really have anything good to say about the straight leg deadlift. Now, I did have someone ask me about single leg deadlift variations, and I'm of two minds here. If we're talking true single leg variations wherein the rear foot is just in the air, it's not touching anything, that's an F tier exercise. And the reason why I put it in F tier is you're going to be so focused on balance and that skill of balance, you can't overload the exercise to make it meaningful and improve your primary deadlift. You're just going to be flopping around, especially with any meaningful load. Whereas something like a split stance deadlift, or if the rear foot is elevated in something like a Bulgarian split squat, just having that back foot against something so it can brace, those go to A tier. And the reason why is now you have eliminated the balance element. You can actually pursue some degree of meaningful overload via the split stance or the rear foot elevated, either way, just having it so there is some sort of pressure point on that back foot. These are also a really great way if you're looking just for a general warm-up. You do your split stance deads. If you're in the off season, maybe you're just wanting to focus on training lighter for a little bit. It can also help restore some relative motion of the hips, help that low back feel a little bit better if you've been doing a ton of heavy bilateral work like most of us have. Now, last but not least is the power clean. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to add a row, and that is going to be power clean tier right here. Now, below that is where we're actually going to put power cleans, and they're going to go into garbage tier. Come on, there we go. And the reason why we are putting power cleans below power clean tier is these are one of those movements that I will never be convinced actually help improve the deadlift. And the reason why is in a proper power clean versus a proper conventional deadlift, they are different stances. Power cleans have a lower hip and generally a slightly wider stance. So what happens is for a lot of the more novice to intermediate level lifters who are training power cleans and conventional deadlifts concurrently, they wind up trying to almost squat their deadlift, or they use a clean position for the deadlift, which is a clean deadlift, and does not really help improve and drive gains in the conventional stance deadlift. Now, there are people who have argued that, oh, well, the power clean helps improve speed off the floor for the deadlift. You know what helps really improve speed off the floor for the deadlift? The deadlift. Power cleans overall, because they're a little too close to the deadlift in the starting position, what happens is that overlap with slight discrepancies in your setup causes people, again, just to kind of blend the two, and it creates an inefficient position for both. If you want a power clean, do your power cleans, but don't kid yourself into thinking that they're going to help improve your deadlift. Now, let's go over the whole list. S tier, we have the deficit deadlift and the Romanian deadlift. A tier, axle deadlift with straps, snatch grip deads, trap bar deads, and split stance deads. B tier, low block pulls, pause deads, snatch grip deficit deads, and stiff leg deads. C tier is going to be the accommodating resistance deadlift. D tier will be super high elevation deads. F tier, rack pulls, straight leg deadlifts, and one leg deadlifts. Power clean tier, nothing. And last but not least, in garbage tier, is the power clean. Anyways, hope you found this useful. I'll be dropping the deadlift accessories tier video here in the next week or two. Hope you folks are having a great time, and I'll see you then.